What is crackling, everybody? Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That is right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com, as it is finals weekend for the LEC and LCS in League of Legends. We're going to break down all the matchups and how to view them from a DFS perspective. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, joined here as always by Brandon Gadula and Tom Vecchio, our League of Legends experts here at numberFire. Brandon, starting things off with you, finals weekend does not carry the same negative connotation as it does in college. How you doing today?
I was trying to figure out where you were going with that. I was like, with the NBA, with like what other finals are bad, and then
Finals gives me like flashbacks, and not like good flashbacks. Like, oh, cool, you forgot to study for this history test for this class that does not matter for your major.
I probably spent about 20% of my college career, which was, I mean, a good 6 years, thinking that there has to be a class that I'm enrolled in that I'm not going to classes for, and then I'm going to get like my grades and get like an F in something, and I'm like, I forgot about that one because I just didn't go to it, and
So then you wouldn't even care about finals weekend.
not for that one, but then I wouldn't graduate, and then
Graduation is overrated.
yeah, I wish I
but
was still in school, but we can.
League of Legends not overrated.
If that's what we get again, I'm gonna be a little disappointed.
No, I'm disappointed in you. Let's go to Tom instead because you've let me down. Tom, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing good. I would have to agree with that. Seeing Fnatic versus G2, it would probably be like Ravens Chiefs. Like we want to see Ravens Chiefs instead of Chiefs Titans. That's what everyone wants to see.
Let's not compare my Mad Lions to the Titans. They would never bench Marcus Mariota for an inferior quarterback. Like this is a drive-by, Tom. We don't need the unnecessary slander. How dare you?
Regardless of that, the G2 Fnatic matchup, if we do get that, really should be the best. I mean, that's what we saw in the past few seasons as just like one of the best matchups, the two best teams going head to head. And we just kind of want to see a rematch, just the two highest quality teams. And in NA, we have another rematch between FlyQuest and EG, and then the winner presumably going on to lose to Cloud9, which we'll get to.
Yeah, it should be pretty fun. As of right now, we have the Saturday slate posted on FanDuel. Obviously, we don't know who's playing Sunday yet, so we can't have actual salaries from that two-game slate. However, we will go through the various hypothetical matchups. Should have a pretty good read on how things will play out. So we'll go through the various matchups and how we view those from a DFS perspective. But the Saturday stuff is set in stone. It is concrete. You can enter contests for those right now. And it's not just the LCS and LCS cooking over on FanDuel. They've also got LPL and LCK contests posting almost every day with early morning locks. If you are listening to this podcast on Wednesday, you can enter the $100,000 Nexus contest with $20,000 going to first place. That locks on early Thursday morning. It is just $9 to enter and to get your shot at the $20,000 grand prize. To check out other contests and to enter, just go to FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. Eligibility restrictions apply. So let's start things off here by talking about the Saturday matchups. That is G2 versus Mad Lions and Evil Geniuses versus FlyQuest. We're going to talk about both the individual games here just in case you are deciding to go with the single match slates, which will be available on FanDuel, I would assume. Actually, I believe they're already posted.
Yeah,
regardless, we're going to go through the individual matchups and talk about the two-match slate within the context and kind of go back and forth between those. But let's start things off here with the G2 versus Mad Lions. Brandon, I'm going to start things off with you here, even though you decided to sully the name of my Mad Lions and speak ill of them. Tom did the same, so honestly, I can't pick. But Mad Lions got the upset over G2 back in round one. Obviously, things did not go as well for them against Fnatic, but can we see it again? Can Mad Lions take down G2 one more time?
I mean, anything's possible. I just wouldn't necessarily count on G2 getting beaten again. When we talked about that first round matchup, I did kind of say that Mad Lions could keep it close, and they did more than that. This time around, though, I feel like 3-1 in favor of G2 is going to be probably the way that this goes, that's kind of where my simulations are for it. I mean, Mad Lions are now 4-3 in this split against G2. G2 does lead in overall towers, 54-48. But again, I think that it's going to be G2, and I don't even know if they'll let this one get to 5.
Have you run the simulations on this one already?
Yeah.
What are they saying about the composition of this matchup?
I have it 76% in favor of G2 to win the match, the best of 5, and a 26% likelihood that they sweep. I really think, and just based on what I feel, which I don't really tend to care about, but also what the simulations say, it's probably going to be 3-1, like I said, and I feel pretty good with that.
Okay, how about you, Tom? It sounds like you want G2 to win so you can get the better matchup on Sunday. But what do you think the Mad Lions' chances are here in this rematch against G2?
I would say 3-1 is likely. I think that's what we're going to end up seeing. A lot of people, or at least some of the experts that I follow on Twitter, the term that they use in the first round matchup when Mad Lions won is, G2 is doing what's called limit testing, where there's an optimal, team comp. And, you kind of asked the question about that last week. It was like, why are some teams playing better as the game goes on? Well, it kind of comes down to what the actual meta is, what the champions they pick. And G2 is a team that's known to, mix things up where they take a champion that could be used in one role and they're just going to force them into the other role because they know that they just have better players playing and they're just going to kind of make it work. And we kind of saw that in the series against Mad Lions in the first round where they're limit testing, like kind of seeing what they can get away with, and they didn't really play by the book. And as Brandon says, I kind of feel like they're not going to let it go to 5 games. They're just going to pick up the 3-1. They're going to play things a little more straightforward. It really comes down to how many of them you can actually afford to roster when it comes to either the single game slate or the 2-game slate, because on the single game slate, the top 4 highest paid or 4 highest players are all G2.
Yeah, and I think that's tough because we do need to find some salary saving somewhere, and that doesn't seem all that easy based on the way things look for that single match slate. Let's talk about the 2-game slate here briefly. Brandon, between these two, which match do you expect to be closer and thus potentially incentivizing us to go a bit harder at that one? We do get the games not played bonus for the winning team, but if we want players on both sides, we want that series to go 5 games. If you had to pick one of these 2 matches on Saturday, Brandon, to go 5 games, which way would you lean?
Evil Geniuses and FlyQuest. That being said, there might not be a ton of fantasy points just based on how those 2 play. So it's kind of a paradox where I think it's much more likely to go 5 games, but I don't know if I like it as much. The other one, G2 and Mad Lions could be a bit bloodier. There could be more kills, more assists, just more action overall. So I kind of view them about equally in terms of the way that I want to target them. And then just honestly, in terms of just positional scarcity and how good these matchups rate out, it's really easy to rate all of G2's starting lineup as the top of their respective positions. So by default, I'm still going to have more exposure to this game because G2 is the team that I really want to load up on, which is not at all a surprise.
Yeah, we'll come back to the G2 individual players here in a second. But Tom, what about you? Are you also skewing or viewing this as being kind of even between which of the 2 matches you'd be more likely to stack for the 2-game slate?
I think it has to be G2 and Mad Lions. And like Brandon said, just like kind of the way the teams enable each other to play just in a specific matchup, like they are just so much bloodier in the G2 versus Mad Lions. And if you look back, like some of these games in the first series, like when they're losing, it's like 27-17 when it comes to, kills for Mad Lions winning game 1. And then we're looking in the 30s and 20s where they're really going back and forth. And then the EG versus FlyQuest series, we're seeing some of these games where it's like 11-7 that FlyQuest comes away with the win. So just because they're winning, the fantasy points really aren't there. So there are some salary savers I actually like on FlyQuest, and I don't know if I'm alone on this. I kind of think they can take this series. It's definitely the lower end of outcomes, but I think they can take this series, and that brings some value for them.
Okay, so we'll get to that in just a bit. But first, let's talk about those top end G2 players Brandon was alluding to before. We have Caps, Perks, and Yonkos. For both the single game and the 2-match slate, we have multiplier spots. For the single match slate, it is an MVP slot, which is 2x points, and a star slot, which is 1.5x. And for the 2-match slate, we have a star slot, which is 1.5x. However, if you use a player from one position in your star slot, that means you need another person of that same position in the regular slot elsewhere, which is important when we're talking about AD carries because they are very expensive. So, Brandon, when you look at this G2 versus Mad Lions matchup, how are you ranking Caps, Perks, and Yonkos as far as which ones you want to prioritize for your multiplier positions?
So they're all the right answer, really. Aside from, and we'll talk about this in a second, but one thing I started doing with these slates is I think positional scarcity, opportunity cost is just really important. And, Perks is amazing, but we have other mid laners that are relevant, that are very good. Caps is amazing. The AD carries aren't necessarily quite as strong as the mid laners on the other three teams, but at the top, I think it has to be Yonkos because he just stands out so much above the rest of the junglers on the slate, whether it's the single match slate or the 2 days or the 2-match slate. So I have it Yonkos, Caps, and Perks, and that's really not a slight to Perks. It's more with Jizuke and Power of Evil in the EG Flag Quest match.
So I think the best way to phrase that is that Yonkos is your top priority among those three. Is that correct?
Yes. I don't necessarily know if you have to roster him in the 1.5x whenever we have more options, because then you have to roster 2 junglers.
Right.
So keep that in mind. But I think if you compare these guys to the rest of their positions and the other alternatives, Yonkos is kind of number one for me.
Okay, so Yonkos number one from a priority perspective on the 2-match slate. Tom, what about for you? If you're looking at the single match slate and trying to find the highest scorer of those three, what order are you ranking them there in that situation?
Well, for a highest score, going to Caps, I think would be the right answer. Kind of like Brandon said, I don't think there's, we're kind of splitting hairs here. But going to Caps, who's the most expensive at 17,000, Perks is at 15.5. I think you have to put Caps in the 2x spot simply so you can pay off value. But I like going to Yonkos in the star spot for 1.5, just because I think it's possible to go a 4-man G2 stack, leaving off Perks, and then just taking some deep value with Kaiser at support. I don't know if that actually works out in terms of specific prices, but you can get Wonder in there. You can get Yonkos. Wonder's not too expensive, and you take some salary savings with Kaiser at support, and that's a pretty solid 4-man stack. And it should help you differentiate, like pivoting off of 2 of their top 3. In terms of leaving off Perks. I think that's a pretty viable option, specifically for the 1-game slate.
So, Tom, you kind of alluded to this, but let's talk about potential players you could use from the Mad Lions, because the single match slate, you do need to use someone from the Mad Lions, and for the 2-match slate, you don't need to, so we don't need to necessarily focus as much there. But is Kaiser the main person who stands out to you on the Mad Lions side, just so you are lowering the amount of salary you have poured into that team, or is there anyone else who stands out to you on the Mad Lions side?
So on the 1-game slate, I think it's Kaiser, just because he's the cheapest player that they have at 7,500, and I think that makes just a lot of sense. On the 2-game slate, I actually think that Humanoid in the mid lane is kind of interesting, just because he's the cheapest mid laner, and if we don't expect them to win, I don't expect, like we always know that you want to get winning players in your lineup. I don't expect there to be too much ownership, but you can probably afford to take Humanoid in the mid spot and then pay up for another mid at the star spot. So you're still getting the equity with Perks or going to Power of Evil. So on the single game, it's Kaiser. And then on the 2-game, I think it's Humanoid at 8,000. Like, he's the cheapest mid laner. Why are we not trying to get 2 mid laners into a lineup at any time?
Okay. How about for you, Brandon? Both for the single match slate and the 2-match slate, you have to use someone from Mad Lions for the single match slate. So who stands out to you there? And is there anyone on the Mad Lions side who you're targeting, given that you expect this to be the higher scoring of the 2 matchups?
So for the single match slate, last time when these two teams faced off, Shadow actually led the slate the single match in FanDuel points, followed closely by Carzy. So I think that that's pretty relevant. It's never, we talk about it sometimes with the opposing junglers on losing teams and Shadow being relevant there. So I think that he's very interesting. As for Kaiser, I mean, I'm fine punting with support just because it's usually a low ceiling position. But even when they won that matchup, Kaiser was last among all the players in FanDuel points and lost out by 14 as opposed to Mickey X. So, I mean, I don't know what the ceiling is, and really what you're doing, I think with Kaiser, he makes a lot of sense in that full-on G2 stack, and you just say that there aren't going to be many kills to be had from Mad Lions. But I would have to say that if I had to pick one for kind of the 2-game slate, it's going to be either Shadow or then Humanoid in the mid lane. I think that anytime you can get a mid laner for a lower price, you really can't knock that.
Yeah, Humanoid is $8,000 for the 2-match slate, and Shadow is $8,100. Both those very much on the value end of the spectrum. Brandon, any value plays stand out to you that we have not discussed yet, whether it be from G2 or Mad Lions?
So let me look here one sec. I was just trying to see what Wonder's price was. 13.5 on the single match. That's only $1,000 cheaper than Yonkos. I would rather go with Wonder still than well, man, that's tough because you really want your players to win because they just outscore losing players pretty frequently. I think Wonder is going to be more of a pivot. I feel like I talk about it all the time, but top laners don't get a lot of love. They can still score. It's a little bit harder for them to rack up a ton of points, but I think Wonder actually counts as a value because he's a G2 player who's not super priced out of the stratosphere. So I think he's relevant in this conversation.
How about for you, Tom? Any other cheaper players you see, whether it be for the 2-match slate or for the single match slate?
Yeah, I got to agree with the Wonder call. I also think that Mickey X would take priority just because people are like, I'm going to pair my support with my ADC. They're going to be going to caps there. They're naturally going to lock in Mickey X. And then it kind of leaves Wonder, just because he's also a lower scoring player, kind of leaves him off by himself. So I do like that call. For this matchup specifically, I think we kind of touched on everything. There are players at support and top I like to in the next game. So I kind of think we're all set here.
Okay, Brandon, any final thoughts for you before we move on to EG versus FlyQuest? Just for the honor of losing to Cloud9, as Tom put it earlier. We have a rematch here. EG won the first round of this series 3-1. Tom, how do you see this rematch playing out between EG and FlyQuest? You kind of alluded before that you might see FlyQuest as being a bit of a value. So how do you see this series shaking out?
So FlyQuest, I want to say, put up a really, really solid series against TSM last week. I would say they're comparable with EG. We have two teams that finished in the top 4. They went back and forth in the regular season. The series 3-1 that EG won in the first round was actually pretty close. We see FlyQuest put up a good series against TSM. They're kind of like peaking at the right time. So I think there's inherent value in FlyQuest just based on where they are on the slate overall. And I think that a FlyQuest and G2 pairing, like stacking these two teams together, is actually really interesting. And I want to point out Solo. He started every game in the 5-game series against TSM. He's kind of taken over that starting role for them in the top lane, not going back and forth with Viper. And then Ignar at 7,100 is a really, really interesting play. And some of the line of construction messing around with. You can go to Ignar, who's really cheap, Power of Evil, going to Solo, and then you kind of have enough salary to still roster Yankos and Perks, and you're getting Power of Evil or Perks in the 1.5 spot. You roster the other one. Like, this matchup is shaping up to be pretty solid. That's not saying I don't like players on EG, but just from an initial standpoint, FlyQuest make a lot of sense if you're trying to stack G2.
Brandon, are you seeing things the same way here, where FlyQuest provides enough value where you are looking to turn their way pretty regularly in order to spend up for the studs on G2?
Yeah, I think me and Tom are both more on FlyQuest than the kind of data would suggest. I mean, Using the full split data, I have this as 63% for EG to win. But I mean, if you look at the full history between these two teams this split, I mean, EG's 5-1 against FlyQuest, but they're 1-1 whenever Solo's been in. Solo's only played them twice out of those 6 matches, and Solo came in, when they first met in the playoffs. He was 4-2-10 in that first matchup, which is kills, deaths, and assists, and then 8-2-4 in the second matchup. I mean, it was a lot closer, 10-8 in towers, 33-25 kills for FlyQuest. So they've kind of had, there are reasons to believe that with Solo as the top laner, things might be a little bit different for FlyQuest. So I do think that this is going to be the place to look for value.
So Solo is $8,000. That is the third most expensive among the top laners on the 2-match slate. Wonder is $8,800, and Kumo in this matchup is $81,000. Does that make you turn towards Solo? You were talking about the impact on the team as a whole, but is Solo individually a good play for you, Brandon, as well at that salary?
Yeah, I mean, he's been very productive when given the opportunity, and it's really hard to compare all these numbers, but he scored like 72 FanDuel points in their first matchup, playing only 2 of the games. And if you project that out to the full series, he would have led the entire slate in FanDuel points in that game. So I mean, he's very productive. He can be very productive, very disruptive, and for that price, he's going to be someone who is very important when we're trying to get to G2.
Okay. Brandon, I'm going to stick with you here because we have these multiplier spots, and it sounds like we're probably leaning towards putting a G2 player in the multiplier slot for the 2-match slate. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But when you're looking for high-scoring players in this matchup between EG and FlyQuest, so mostly, I guess, focusing on the single-match slate, who stands out to you most there between these two teams?
There are going to be 3, and I think really only 3 who deserve consideration. It's going to be Bang, the 80 carry for Evil Geniuses, and then the 2 mid laners, so Jizuke for EG and Power of Evil for FlyQuest. I think that you can differentiate in other ways, even on the single match slate. So I don't know if I would. Nobody else really projects to be relevant enough in this series to take up a multiplier slot. So that's probably how I'm going to play it.
What about for you, Tom? Power of Evil is actually pretty cheap, both on the 2-match slate and on the single match slate. $8,100 for the 2-match slate, whereas Perks is $9,400. Are you seeing the same thing, Tom, as far as which players you'd expect to be the highest scoring from this specific series?
Absolutely. Like I said, I like FlyQuest as a stack overall. The single game slate, his salary is awesome, right? He's sitting there at $12,000. He's the 6th most expensive, 5th most expensive on the entire slate. Like, I think Wild Turtle is kind of priced too high. Like, he's a good ADC. He's not like a super high impact ADC. And I think that going to Power of Evil, Jizuke, and Bang in between the MVP and the star spot is absolutely the right call. How you do that, I think, is up to you. But I have to be in full agreement there. Go to Bang, go to Jizuke, go to Power of Evil. The $8,000 price tag on the 2-game slate for Power of Evil, I think, is way too cheap. He's been playing very well, especially in the series against TSM. I like going him in the mid lane. I like going to Perks and the star spots. FlyQuest and EG for me this week.
Okay, and that's what I was going to ask, is if you would be looking to play 2 of these. But let's talk about Jizuke versus Power of Evil, because Jizuke on the single match slate is a lot more expensive than Power of Evil, so I think that's less of a relevant discussion because it sounds like we're viewing both them pretty highly. But on the 2-match slate, Jizuke is $8,400, whereas Power of Evil is $81,000. That $300 can go a long way, but it's a lot smaller than what we have on the single match slate. So, Tom, between Jizuke and Power of Evil, where are you leaning when we're talking about the 2-match slate?
It's still with Power of Evil.
Okay,
where it's a few $100 difference. Even if you look back to the series with when they played, was it the first round of the playoffs? Power of Evil put up 95 total points in that series, which was across 4 games in the win. In the same series, Jizuke only put up 119. I know that's a sizable difference, but I don't think that's worth the $300. Like especially if I'm also trying to take a bit of leverage and saying that FlyQuest are going to be winning this series, I'm going to take the savings. I'm going to go with the ownership. I'm going to go with the full FlyQuest stack. Everything is considered, and I'm sticking with PoE.
All right, so Brandon, let's move to you. We've talked about a lot of value plays just because I think it seems like FlyQuest may be underpriced a bit to begin with. Anyone else stand out to you that we have not mentioned yet as potential salary savers in this series?
I mean, I don't think either of us are saying it's going to be a FlyQuest steamroll. So,
sure.
We're in on Bang. I think we can be in on Zazel, especially if you're looking for salary savers. He's a very productive support in terms of, KDA. So he's really attached to Bang. And if we're expecting this one to go, I mean, I guess I don't even know what Tom's thinking. I think this could very easily be a 5-game series, like we said, kind of alluded to before. I would probably say Zazel stands out to me if we're looking for sheer value plays.
What about for you, Tom? What's the best value on the board from this match?
It's Ignar at 7,100. And, these last 2 series, both of which that they won against TSM and Golden Guardians, he put up over 100 points in these series. And, 7,100 on the slate. I think he's the 3rd or 2nd cheapest.
He's 3rd most expensive. Zazel is 73. Ignar is 71.
Yeah, Ignar's the 2nd cheapest position player on the full 2-game slate. Kaiser is 68, and then Ignar is 71. So on the full 2-game slate, we're getting some really, really nice savings. And, kind of this like whole theme is like playing back into we get 3 players from G2 into a lineup. And I think going to Jankos and Perks have to be the top 2. Whoever happens to be the 3rd, I think is really nice. Getting some really, really good savings with Ignar, getting Power Vivo in that lineup, and whether it's going to be solo in that next spot. Actually, Santorin had a really solid series against EG, specifically in the games that they won. Like, we're working with a few different options. Now, going to Santorin is a bit of a different story because that would either block you from rostering Jankos or you have to roster 2 of them, which is certainly not my favorite call. But I'm on board with FlyQuest. I think it's going to be a 5-game series in favor of FlyQuest, and I think that makes them all the more valuable.
All right, Tom, any final thoughts for you on this series before we move on?
No, I would say on the single game slate, that's where things get really interesting because 3 out of the top 4 players in terms of salary are EG. There's obviously a ton of different ways to differentiate if you go to FlyQuest. But if you are going to a FlyQuest stack, I would say be sure to prioritize getting Bang into one of those multiplier spots and then kind of get creative in terms of who else you roster from FlyQuest.
Okay, so let's move on to the Sunday slate. Once again, we don't actually have the slates yet because we don't know who is facing whom, but we'll start things off here with Fnatic versus the winner between G2 and Mad Lions. And I think we can mostly proceed as if this is going to be a Fnatic versus G2 matchup. We can talk briefly about what would happen if the Mad Lions were to win. But Brandon, how would you see things playing out if we did get to see Fnatic versus G2 in this final on Sunday?
It's pretty much a coin flip in terms of just overall efficiency. G2 are 2-0 in this series and pretty handedly in this split, 36-15 in terms of deaths, 16-7 in towers. So if they face off, I'm probably going to lean toward G2. I think that it doesn't make sense to overreact to their loss to Mad Lions. Fnatic looked amazing. I'm just really hoping that this is what we get.
How about for you, Tom? How would you see things play out if it were G2 versus Fnatic?
I think it would be a minimum 3-1 series. Like, sometimes we say, what we said last week for Fnatic against Mad Lions is like, oh, it would be 3-0, maybe a 3-1 in favor of Fnatic. Like, I think that since this is such a coin flip, I don't see either team pulling away. I'm hoping for 5 games. At the end of the day, I probably will side with G2 if I had to. Give me 3-2. Super close. When those salaries come out, whether you're playing the single game slate on Sunday, I would say a G2 stack with some of the cheaper options, specifically also adding their team on the single game slate, I think would be really interesting. And if that allows you to pay up for Reckless from Fnatic, that's something you should consider.
And Tom, I'm assuming here that we are going to skew more towards stacking the Fnatic versus G2 or Mad Lions matchup versus stacking the Cloud9 side of things. Is that your read on this as well?
Yeah, I think it's kind of the same situation of what we have for Saturday, where the Fnatic potential G2 matchup would just be much, much bloodier compared to Cloud9 versus whoever they play.
Yeah.
If it's Cloud9, I don't care if it's EG or FlyQuest, it would be Cloud9 3-0, which is what we would expect, or Cloud9 3-1, still being dominant the whole time with not a whole lot of fantasy points.
And the good thing for Cloud9 is they would get the games not played bonus, but the games not played bonus is not going to be necessarily equal to what they would get from a full 5-match series. So that's definitely something worth keeping in mind here. And whoever they face, if they don't go 5 games, does not get that bonus. And that's something we want to avoid for sure. All right, Brandon, from Fnatic versus G2, again, assuming that is a matchup. And Tom, I'm going to ask you about potential Mad Lion situations here in a second. But Brandon, which plays would you be turning to first if we do get Fnatic versus G2?
Oh, boy. I would be leaning toward G2. So a lot of the same players we just discussed. Probably Yonkos would still be up there just because he's just so good for a jungler. And then you have to factor in, I mean, I'm not going to beat myself up over not being able, I don't know what salaries are going to be, but if I have to settle for Reckless instead of Caps, I'll be fine with that. So I think Yonkos and Perks stand out much more than Caps would because we would have Reckless as an option. Okay,
how about for you, Tom? What are the top plays, assuming we get a Fnatic versus G2 matchup here?
Overall, I think Reckless is always going to be up there just from his pure stats, his involvement, kill participation percentage is super high. His overall KDA is super high, et cetera, et cetera. I think potentially taking a stand on Fnatic would be interesting. Like we said, if we're expecting a coin flip and we just happen to be leaning, or as Brandon says, happen to be feeling a little bit of G2, I think that's one thing. But going to a Fnatic stack and specifically rostering Selfmade and Bwipo, their jungler and their top laner, probably should be among the lower owned options on the slate overall. And that's where things get interesting. If they're cheaper, hopefully we could get Selfmade, Bwipo, and Reckless, spend up for one or two of G2 players, and then if the salaries work out, again, we don't have them, maybe you grab Vulcan, the support from Cloud9, just so you get some exposure to that team. And then that's looking like a pretty solid lineup. So Reckless, number one, from an overall equity standpoint, Selfmade and Bwipo from an ownership standpoint. And then on G2, you can't go wrong with any of their top three.
Okay. Tom, let's discuss a hypothetical here. If we do get Fnatic versus Mad Lions, would you expect Fnatic to roll in that situation? Or would Mad Lions have shown enough by that point to give you some optimism about them in that matchup if they were to beat G2 on Saturday?
That is, that's a tough question because they did not look like Fnatic dominated them in that series. So if you would go to anyone on Mad Lions, it would probably just be Carzzy for the safest option. Going to Shadow would be probably the most interesting option just because he would be the player that would need to get something done. Like Brandon said, he had a very, very strong series against G2 when they won that. It's, there's correlation there between the jungler playing well and the team performing well overall. So Carzzy is probably the safest option, the highest floor, but Shadow in the jungle for Mad Lions probably have lower ownership and probably brings the most leverage, specifically in that matchup.
Okay, how about for you, Brandon? If we do get Mad Lions here, are you going to just assume that Fnatic rolls again, or how are you seeing things there?
So for that to happen, Mad Lions are going to have to beat G2, twice, in two different best of fives. So I might have to reconsider a little bit, but
right.
In their 5 matchups against each other this year, Fnatic are 4-1. The tower average has been 8.2 to 4.4. They haven't been super close. There wasn't a whole lot to take away from their playoff series. I would really just have to lean toward Fnatic, and if that were the case, I would be looking at Humanoid and Shadow primarily for me. I don't think Carzzy's a bad call by any means, but if there aren't going to be many kills, then I don't want to spend up for Carzzy, who's just I would guarantee going to be the most expensive player from Mad Lions in that situation.
All right, so let's do Cloud9 versus either EG or FlyQuest. Brandon, between EG and FlyQuest, which pair do you think has a better chance to make things competitive here versus Cloud9, or does it just not matter? We should assume Cloud9 is going to roll regardless.
I think possibly EG's the team with the better chance, which is a little bit, of a I guess paradox, because I think FlyQuest might have a little bit of an edge. But Cloud9 have lost 2 games all season, and one of them was to EG. So, I mean, that's really all I got. Cloud9, they're just so good. Everything about their team just really screams. I mean, it's going to be, I would imagine 3-0. They wouldn't really let anything happen, and I don't expect either of these teams to sneak up on Cloud9 and take a best-of-5 series.
All right, Tom, either team, do you think they have a chance against Cloud9, or are you leaning the same way as Brandon, where we're expecting most likely a sweep here?
Most likely a sweep. If EG beat FlyQuest and it's EG versus Cloud9, it's interesting because Svenskeren and Zazel played for Cloud9 last year. They got traded in
revenge game.
Yeah, a little revenge game. Like Brandon said, EG are one of the only 2 teams to beat Cloud9 throughout this entire year, playoffs included. 3-1 at best. If EG win the series, it'd probably most likely be a 3-0, and it would be almost certainly a 3-0 if they do play FlyQuest. Like, Cloud9 are the best team in A since, was it 2016 or 2017 spring, when we saw Immortals on that 17. They went 17-0 or 17-1 to start the season. That was a team with Xmithy. They had Poe Belter in the mid lane. And they had Turtle on the team. Or was it? I have to double check my LCS history, but it was a super strong team. This is what we're seeing from Cloud9. They are amazing, and you want to be trusting them every time you can.
Well, if my Mad Lions do lose, I will be turning towards EG just so I can get this revenge game. I want them to be FlyQuest so we can get the revenge game. I can get my narrative and then watch them get steamrolled as well, because why not? I'm bad at picking good teams to root for. All right, Tom, when you're looking at Cloud9 and looking at potential multiplier spots, who stands out to you there as being the potential highest scorers for this matchup?
What was it? Last week, I had Blabber in the 1.5x spot on the 2-game slate. Really like that. Just brings so much kill participation, very high ceiling for Cloud9. I think you can be trusting him there. Going to Sven is, of course, the right answer, the easy answer, whatever you want to call it, just because he has such a high floor combined with a high ceiling. I think that's fine. I think it gets interesting if you decide to pivot off one of those 2 on a single game slate and going to Licorice or Niski in the 1.5x spot while putting Blabber in the 2x spot. I think going off of the Sven in one of those, going off the chalk, is always interesting. On the 2-game slates, I would say still going to Blabber is probably one of the, I would say, more likely roster construction paths that I take, because then you could go Blabber and Yankos, and you're getting 2 really high impact, highly involved players. But going to Sven is, of course, the easy answer. So go to him as the comfortable option. If you want to get weird, go to Blabber and Licorice on the 1-game slate.
How about for you, Brandon? Where are you looking at Cloud9 and ranking the top-end players from a multiplier perspective?
I mean, it's very easy to put Sven first, but I might put Niski there in the mid lane. KDA means a lot, but, just kills and assists. If you kind of reduce the fact that Sven doesn't really die a lot, and you remove sort of the penalty from Blabber and Niski for having a little bit of elevated kills just by comparison, which you can't really compare a cross position like that. But if you look just at kills and assists, I mean, they're up there with Sven. The gap closes a lot, and they're very productive players. I would have to put, obviously, on these single match slates, or the top are 17,000. I don't think you have to play Sven. I think that you obviously can, but Niski and Blabber totally fine as well.
Any other things stand out to you, Brandon, looking at this Cloud9 matchup? Anything else you want to mention, whether it be potential value plays from EG or FlyQuest or cheaper ways to get exposure to Cloud9?
I mean, I'm always fine going with a top laner, like I said before with Licorice, but really it's just going to be you punt with whatever kind of looks good. It's going to be potentially cheaper mid laners if we get one on the opposite side because we'd be fine with either mid laner really. And if they're priced down a little bit, that would be very much something that we could take advantage of. Potentially the opposing supports, but it's really going to be a Cloud9 route kind of regardless.
All right. Any final thoughts for you, Tom, on Cloud9 versus EG or FlyQuest before we close up shop?
It's Cloud9. Get a stack in there on the single game slates. Grab Sven, grab Niski, and then punt with whoever you want on EG.
All right.
Very straightforward.
Sweet. That's all we have for today then. Should be a pretty fun weekend. I think that the Saturday slate's looking good, and then hopefully we do get that G2 versus Fnatic matchup. Though if it is my Mad Lions, I'm not going to complain by any means. Make sure you are checking out numberFire.com to check out the helpers that Tom and Brandon are writing up for League of Legends. Tom has also been doing CSGO stuff when that comes back, so make sure you check out that as well. That will all be posted over on numberFire. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there, in theory?
Yeah, my account is at Gadula13, GDULA13.
My fever dream is where you become like this Twitter fiend and are like
jokes, but some good takes every now and then.
In theory. Just kidding, yeah. Tom. Just kidding. DFS_Tom there. I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You will find me celebrating the Mad Lions win over there on Saturday. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, their video producer, for running the video side of things here today, as always. Thank you, Cal, and thank you, everyone, for tuning in, but also just wishing you good luck with these slates on Saturday and Sunday, and have fun watching these matchups. Hopefully they live up to the hype. Hopefully we get the best matchups possible and get us a distraction from all that is going on with some fun esports League of Legends action this weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy. We'll talk to you again soon. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire.